Well, welcome to another episode of Specimen Series, and in this episode you find me travelling down to the beautiful River Test in search of grayling. Now, I've fished this river before and caught numbers of grayling on camera, but those really big ones have eluded me, so I class a £2 grayling as a big grayling, and we have just scraped the £2 barrier before, but the stretch I've chose to fish on this trip hasn't got the numbers of grayling, but there's a chance of a £2, or dare I say even a fish of around about £2.5. After around 10 minutes of a little and often feeding approach, trickling red maggots through the swim, it didn't take long to start getting bites, and the first fish to show up, which are quite often the first fish to show up, were some trout. Now, for every big grayling in the river there probably is about 10 trout, so you can't be off catching a few of them, although I try my best to avoid them. Please don't be a trout. Please don't be a trout. I think it is. Well, I've been in this swim probably 20 minutes, half an hour now, just constantly feeding maggots, and I am getting bites, but they are these big brown trout. We really don't want to catch them. It can't be avoided on these rivers, but I'm sure somewhere amongst these trout will be the grayling that we've come here for, so I'll give it a bit longer in this swim. If I do keep catching trout, I will move, because there's so many nice swims to explore. If I don't catch grayling in a swim quite quickly, I will get on my toes and try and find some, but I'm pretty sure this is a trout. This is when a big grayling pops up. A little bit too energetic for a grayling. Yeah, another brown trout. Right, we'll get this in. I'll give it another 10 minutes in here, and then we might drop a bit further down if I catch another trout. Well, no grayling turned up in that first swim, and with so much of the river to explore, I wanted to get on the move fairly quickly, because I felt if I was in the right swim and I fed maggots for 5 or 10 minutes, if there was grayling present, I wouldn't be long in catching one. Well, this is the second spot that I'm going to try this morning. It looks really nice. There's a nice smooth glide down here, and exactly the same as the last swim. You have to feed a bit of bait through the swim before you start getting bites. That's exactly what happened there. It took me a little while to get that first bite, but unfortunately they were trout. So I've moved away from those trout. I know there's some big grayling on this stretch. This looks prime for a grayling, so I'm going to start trickling some maggots in, running the float down, and let's see what's in this spot. Now, the next swim that I dropped into looked absolutely perfect. My favourite type of swim on these chalk streams are the nice, smooth, steady glides. And the reason I like them, it makes feeding and building the swim a lot easier, because you know exactly where those maggots are going to go. And this swim didn't disappoint, and I wasn't long in starting getting a few bites. Got something. I think it's another trout. I do find on this light gear, if you play the fish with a rod tip quite low, you can guide them upriver quite smoothly, and then just bring the rod in an upright position when you're ready to net them. But I'm sure this is another trout. It splashed on the top. We aren't here for the trout, but unfortunately you can't help but catch a few. Somewhere amongst them will be what we're after. Might actually be a big grayling, this one. It is a big grayling, not a trout, so that's perfect. What do I know? And my trout that I was guiding up the river has just turned into a nice big grayling, so what do I know? Look at that for a grayling. Let's hope we can get this in the net, because that's exactly what we've drove all this way for. There's a nice one. This is when you pray that little size 16 holds. Just take your time. You guide him into the edge and then try and bring him up. Or I wish I had a little bit more land in that handle up. Oh, don't do that there. Almost graceful a netting, but we needed that one to go in the net. That's a lovely fish. Well, I was hoping to get a grayling over £2 on this trip, and the first one is hovering about between 2.7 and 2.8. I'm going to call it 2.7, but that's exactly why we made the long journey down here. The grayling on the Stretcher River, the average size is a good size. Well, it's so important to get these grayling back in the water fairly quickly, but we'll have a quick look before we slip it back in. And fishing for grayling's a real treat for me. I live in Suffolk, we haven't got any grayling in East Anglia, so coming down here to the river test is a real treat, even more so when I catch grayling as big as this. Well, I always rest the grayling in the net just for a minute or two, just to make sure they're really strong before you put them back. That way they swim off nicely. I'm just going to hold it there until it swims out of my hand, even if it takes a minute or two. There we go. Brilliant. Well, I had a couple more trots through that swim, and it wasn't long till I was connected to another fish that for a moment I thought was another grayling. It felt exactly like that big grayling, but sure enough it was another trout just pretending to be a grayling this time. Fish on. Well, I'm not even going to try and guess what I've hooked this time, because it doesn't feel like a trout. But I have guessed just about wrong every fish I've hooked, so whatever it is, it feels nice. What have we got? A grayling. It's a grayling. Lovely job. Come on. He's trying to jump back out. Calm down. Lovely. Well, another nice grayling. Not as big as that first one, but that first one was a bit of a special fish, but still a nice one. But I'm going to show it quickly, but I'm hardly going to take it out of the water. But another absolutely pristine river test grayling. So I'm going to slip it straight back. I won't need to rest it. It's still full of life. So I'm going to slip it straight back in. There you go, mate. Lovely. I do like to hook one the fat way, one the thin way. I think it just sits a bit better. With a little and often baiting approach, quite often the swim will get better and better, and you'll get more and more bites as you build the swim by trickling the bait in. And it wasn't long till I connected a fish that definitely wasn't a trout this time. There was no head shaking like the trout. It was on the bottom, hugging the bottom, nice and slow, a lot heavier, and I had a hook pull. And in the back of my mind, I thought, had I just lost a really big grayling? This feels all right as well. Always nice when they're not too rattly, then you start thinking grayling rather than trout. But yay! He's very welcome, he is. Very pleased with this chub. It's a welcome gate crasher at the grayling fishing, but more importantly, I lost a fish earlier that I didn't know whether it was a big chub or a big grayling, and second trot down I've caught a chub. So I probably just bumped a chub, which is less painful than bumping a big grayling. But I don't mind catching these on the trotting gear as well. That's fantastic sport. I persevered in that swim, and I did catch another trout, and I had a couple of lovely chub. And as much as I like catching the chub on the trotting gear, I can catch them on the rivers back at home. So I decided to move a little bit further down, where two parts of the river joined on a junction, causing a really nice crease. Now this looked really good, but the only problem I had, we had a lot of rain overnight, and I think there was just a bit too much water for this swim to produce. But I did give it a good go, and I did get a bite in that swim, but it turned out to be another trout. So further upriver, just above a big willow tree, was another one of those smooth glides, similar to where I'd caught the previous grayling, and I felt sure if I trickled a bit of bait through that swim, there could be some fish in there. This swim looks good, but it's just not done me a bite yet. That's fish. I've had quite a few trots in this new swim. This is the first definite bite I've had, It took me a little while to get this bite. I had to keep putting the feed in as per usual. I'm not going to try and guess what it is because I've got them mostly wrong today, but it is either a trout or a grayling. Hopefully a grayling. Rah! It's a trout. Ah! Here we go then. One. That's a fish. What's this going to be? White, whatever it is. Oh yes, Brian. I've just had a glimpse of this and it is another grayling and it's another real nice one. So I'm going to take it as steady as I can. It really is quite hairy playing them in this fast flow. Don't have to rush it. I'd dearly like to... just jumped out the water. I'd dearly like to see this one in the net. Yeah, that's a 3, I think. Now that face I pulled when I caught that big barbel on the Trent. It's another one of them faces. I just want it in the net. I might have to go down river of it in a bit. It's a real big grayling. It's coming. Looked like a good swim, this. He just rolled on the line, but we will get him in the net. That's a big grayling, that one. That is mega. It's got to be £3, that has. Got to be. Lovely. That's a worrying small hook for a chunky fish. Well, if this isn't £3, it's going to be a good two. It's a real nice grayling. The sling's all zeroed, so... Well, there we go. I'll turn it round to the camera. I'd call that about £3.2, that one. So that's more than I could have dreamed of on this trip. I was pleased with that £2.7, but to catch a £3 grayling on a Specimen Series, well, I'm over the moon with that. How about that? That is grayling perfection, and large grayling perfection as well. They're always fairly lively, and much the same as I said with the others, we will get it back fairly quick, but we've got to admire it for a few seconds. £3.2 of river test grayling. Like that. Just wait for it to get her strength. Here she goes. Thank you very much. I'm going to keep hold of her until she really swims off. There we go. That was mega. Well, another heart-stopping moment. For a moment I thought it was another big grayling, but no, it's another trout. They really do pull hard, but not what we're here for. I'm probably going to make this my last trot. I can't ask no more from this swim. To catch a £3 grayling for the Specimen Series, well, I wasn't expecting one that big. There's a couple more swims I want to stop in on the way back to the van, but we are back again tomorrow. But before I fish that next swim, I'll sit down for a minute and I'll talk you through the tackle and the hardware that I'm using. So let's take a couple of minutes to talk through the hardware and the setup that I'm using on this trip. And I've got a Drennan Vertex, a 14-foot float rod, and that's a nice sensitive float rod. If you use a rod with too much power, you're going to pull those tiny little hooks out. And then on that rod, I've got a fixed spool reel on this trip. The river here is quite wide in places, and a few of the real nice glides are on the far bank, and it's too deep to use my waders. So using a little fixed spool just makes it a little bit easier to cast to the far bank and hold that float on the line that I want it to run through. And on that little reel, I've got some 5-pound main line, and then I come down to some nice big floats. I did actually start with an 8-gram float this morning because we had quite a lot of rain overnight, but when we got to the river this morning, it wasn't as high as I thought it would be, and I've gone down to a 5-gram float. It's held on there with some float rubbers. Then you may have seen me use this before, but rather than pinch loads of swan shot on the line, I've got a 5-gram Olivet to a 3.5-pound hook link with a couple of little dropper shot. I think it's a number 6 and a number 8. And I've got a size 16 hook on here to 3.5-pound hook link, but that's quite a small size 16. Playing those big grayling on that tiny little hook does make your heart skip a beat sometimes, but as long as everything's balanced and you take your time, you can land those grayling, even those great big 3-pounders on this setup. Right, it is getting towards the end of the day. I've had a brilliant first day, but we are back again tomorrow. And the river downstream from me, we've got a guy there. He's cutting all the reeds down with a little mini digger, and there's a lot of reeds flowing down the river, and he's caused quite a lot of disturbance. So we've got one little pool just behind Chris, the cameraman. We're going to drop in there for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes. Then I think I need a well-earned pint after getting that massive grayling. We'll get back a little bit earlier this evening, have a bite to eat, a pint, and then be back early tomorrow morning. Literally run it down this bank. Fish on. Well, much the same as the other swims that I've gone in today. It takes a little while of feeding maggots through the swim to get that first bite. And although it's quite a bit faster in this swim, I've definitely had a couple of bites that I just felt the fish for a second and they came off. But this one stayed on. It has just been airborne a minute ago, but I couldn't tell you whether it's a small grayling or a lively trout. Hopefully we'll find out in a minute. I think it's a graylinette. Where's my net? Come on, you bugger. It's a grayling. It's turned into a trout. I thought it was. Wow. Little tiny trout. Never mind. Grayling, it's just not massive, but it's okay. Ta-da! Well, I think I'm going to make this last little fella the last grayling of the day. It's been an awesome day here on the test. I think I deserve to go back and have a nice cold pint of cider to celebrate that 3-pounder. We have got a few hours back on the river in the morning. There's quite a few swims we haven't fished today, but there is another day tomorrow. But let's slip this lively little fella back and have a pint of cider. Thank you, buddy. Off you go when you're ready. And away. The following morning I could see that the river had dropped a bit, and a few of those fast boily swims that didn't really look as if they'd produced the day before now looked worth trying. So I dropped a little bit further down the river than where I finished the night before, and I could see there was a nice crease and a little bit of slack water on the far bank, and after running the float through a couple of times, my hunch paid off and I soon connected to a fish. She felt the bite on the rod as well as the float going under. Wondering whether I had the depth set right. It takes you a few trots just to get the depth right. And second trot through, only as the float gone under, I actually felt it on the rod tip thump as it took the bait. So God knows whether it's a trout or a grayling, but it feels a nice fish, whatever it is. Just hanging in that flow. Let's see. Save me dragging him up against the the flow so much. There's a grayling. Bring him up against the flow and then try and get him on the top. What a lovely start that is. Lovely. It's time for a bit of early morning grayling juggling, and well, that's a beautiful fish. That is second cast on the second morning here. And realistically, that's still a really nice grayling, but was just overshadowed by what we caught yesterday. We had a brilliant day yesterday, so we're just going to fish for a couple of hours this morning, catch a few more, hopefully like this, and then get on the road. But if I can catch a few more that size, that'll be the icing on the cake for this trip. Off you go, fella. Thank you very much. Lovely. Well, it was great to start the second day with a nice grayling, but there was a few spots further upriver that I was yet to explore. One spot in particular, there was a lot of shallow, fast water, but where the river passed under a bridge, there was a nice deep hole on my own bank that looked really good for a bite or two. Fish. Hopefully this is a grayling. It took me a couple of trots to find the right line. It was going far too quick in the middle of the river. I just held the float back, slowly inched it through that slack water, and it looked like a grayling when it twisted when I set the hook. So again, take my time, and hopefully we can get this in. Yeah, it's a rainbow trout, not a grayling. Still, it's a bite in a new swim, and previously when we've caught trout, we have caught grayling in the same swim, so. Well, unfortunately that wasn't the case, so I headed back downriver, past the footbridge, to a really fast, shallow swim, and despite the extra flow in the current, I still felt it would produce me a bite or two. Now there's an advantage and a disadvantage to fishing these really fast swims. I think because the maggots are flowing down the river a lot quicker, the fish don't have so much time to decide whether they want them or not, so they can be a lot more greedy if you can get them feeding. But the disadvantage is, if you're fortunate enough to catch a few fish, playing those fish against that really fast flow really can be hard work. Well, it took, again, the same old story. It took me 20 minutes of feeding and I caught that trout. Dropped the float back in. It's moved probably 15 yards down the swim, and well, me and Chris have both seen this in the clear water. It's another nice grayling. It's just come off. Yeah, it's just come off the hook. Never mind. I knocked it off because you said I had to go home if I caught one more big one. Fish. That's a trout. Now I probably persevered with that fast swim much longer than I should have done because I lost that nice grayling. But after trout after trout after trout, I thought I'd better have a move because I don't want to catch too many trout. So I decided to drop back down to that nice smooth glide where I'd caught the big grayling before. It wasn't long until I connected with another fish. You never guess what it was. Yes, it was another trout. Now, if you let catching a few trout on these chalk streams put you off fishing certain swims, you probably wouldn't fish any of the swims. And I carried on trotting in that nice smooth swim, and I was soon connected with a fish that definitely wasn't a trout. Well, I'm definitely going to make this the last fish of the trip. It's been an awesome trip. I came to the test hoping for a 2-pound grayling and managed to get a 3-pounder. So I'm over the moon, and these chub have been great fun on the trotting gear. So a massive shout out to Ollie for inviting us over here. If you want to fish this section of the river, he does offer guided days. So that's Ollie Johnson. But we're going to slip this fella back and get on the road. We've got a 4-hour drive back to Norfolk. But if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to give it a like, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next one. And I enjoy seeing all your comments as well. Lovely. Ba 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 ding 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 ding.